Hello to everybody. I'm Mike Haggerty, and I'm here with Mike Clayton again for another edition of today's Heads Up podcast, sponsored by our USA Wrestling National Coaches Council. We're so excited to get this one rolling because we have two very special guests. I can't wait to hear some of the stuff because going as we started early, we already had some pretty interesting stuff happening. So, Mike, I'm going to let you introduce our two guests, and maybe then we'll get into the Q&A. So, Mike, it's
Awesome.
all yours, brother.
Well, Tela, thanks so much. We've got an Olympian with us, and Tela and Andrea. I mean, gosh, I'm sorry I don't have every one of your credentials in front of me, but how many national teams have you been on?
Me? Oh, six maybe national teams, and then I had the opportunity to go to 5 world championships in the early 90s.
Wow.
So we got some wrestling experience on this call. Just a little. I want to start off, if you guys don't mind, with a quote that Andrea had said. Is this okay to throw your words back at you?
Sure. I probably wouldn't even know it was mine. Go ahead.
So this was upon receiving the 2020 Woman of the Year award, which was the first year USA Wrestling gave that out as a co-award for you and Joan Fulton. And what you said was, it's very humbling for anyone to take a look at your effort, participation, or work and say that they see it, that they see value in it, and they thank you for it. And then you mentioned how this contribution has helped through community. And having had a lot of conversations with Tela, that word value, I thought maybe this is where we would start off this podcast. You mentioned it feels so good to be valued for your effort, for your work, for who you are. We don't always get that. And so since we're talking to coaches, we want to make sure that our coaches are creating environments where people feel valued. So if I drop the ball in your lap right now, you happy to run with it?
Sure.
It's great. So this is because we've been talking about this. This has come up a lot in our conversations. How do we create the best environment for our kids, and what does that look like? So what are some of your thoughts to start us off with that?
I think every coach at the beginning of the season, maybe you have to do it every single day. You just have to remember, what is my personal mission here with these kids? Is it to create performers, or is it to create people? You know, am I here to just get wins? Am I focused on the wins and the losses only? Is it just to create the perfect lineup for my dual team? Is it just to create state champions? You know, is that what I'm here for? Or am I here to help kids be seen as they come into the wrestling room? Am I here to listen to their lived experiences and realize that when they come into my wrestling room, those lived experiences either help or hinder the work that I'm doing? How do I make those kids feel or believe, and I think the belief is really important, that I will care more about their mental health, their physical health, their social health than I care about anything else? And how do I go about on a daily basis, whether it's training, whether it's weight room, whether it's those early 6 a.m. practices, whether it's on the bus, whether it's at a tournament, whether they win or whether they lose, how do I build a trust level with those kids that they know it doesn't matter, you know, if I win state or I qualify, this person is invested in me as a human being, becoming the best human being that I can be, and using wrestling as a tool to accomplish that, versus we're going to have a great team this year and we're going to win state and we're going to do all this stuff. And then we hope that they get the character and human building along the way, right? So coaches, we know that there are coaches that do this. They're very committed. They have made this the core part of their mission statement, which is to better them as human beings, and we're going to use wrestling to do it.
Have you ever heard of a coach that worked on the mental, physical, and the social, and really made sure they were taking care of the kids, and their record just got a lot worse? Have you ever heard of that?
You know, what I've heard is that, and I heard this from a gentleman at an NWCA conference. He said, you know, when I just took the focus off of winning and I put the focus on getting to know them and making sure that we're training hard, we're doing all the right things that we know we need to do in the sport of wrestling to make sure that we're putting our best efforts on the mat. But alongside that, really keeping the focus on individual people, valuing each other, seeing each other, and they had more fun. Performance anxiety goes down, and a sense of community increases. And we need a sense of community, meaning my community can see me at my best, my worst, my ugliest, when I have the most self-doubt, when I believe in myself the least, and they love me anyway. Right? That's what community is. They're not there to solve all my problems. They're just there to say, hey, we see you. We see what you're going through. We appreciate your vulnerability if you're willing to share that with us. We're all going through those same things, right? And so I think what we really, I think we're starved right now to be seen as individuals, but to also have a real sense of community. It's difficult to know that a kid can walk into a wrestling room with 50 people, and at the end of the season, they still feel alone. That's concerning. So, you know, our sport is hard. Everything we do is hard. It is such a great parallel to life. So
it seems like even people who aren't involved in sports right now, it's hard. Right? If you're not involved in sports, life is tough. Like it just the last few years, things have ramped up. Anxiety's tougher for everybody.
Yes, and our young people are really struggling. That's just it's just the truth. They're we all talk about these being unprecedented times, but our kids are really struggling.
Yeah. And I definitely want to reiterate what Andrea's saying. That value is so important. And you know, like there's the value that we give something and then the perceived value that somebody feels that they have. There's different pieces of that. And then there's what we show we value by the choices we make and the words that we say. I think that, you know, when it comes to, again, I think I'm reiterating a lot of what you're saying, Andrea, but I think it's just so important that as we're coaches, we value the person who shows up and is a really great practice partner, but really doesn't perform out on the mat. You know, we want them to, we're going to support them to try to get to that next level, but they're just as important as the person that like has a bad attitude in practice. And that's their challenge, but they perform like beautifully on the mat. Everybody's value isn't always the same. And I think that when we really win in sports, it's when we're recognizing that value is more than just, winning. It's being a good teammate. It's being responsible, respectful, consistent, all those things that everybody can really be seen as having value as part of that community and as part of that team.
Mike, they're starting to make me dig a lot deeper than I. I should just show up and coach my wrestling because I'm a good wrestler. I know the double. Yeah. I'm going to coach my double, and I can leave. And if my kids win, then it's good for me. And if they don't, well, that's on them because they just didn't pay enough attention.
No, I absolutely love the intuitive, reflective thinking in this regard. And whether it's girls or guys, I mean, that doesn't really change the scenario. Something that sort of came to my mind as we were talking about this, the lessons in the world and you know, that we treat everybody in this as though they're just as valuable in how they, whether they perform well. Andrea, I think you mentioned that, whether they perform well or they don't. And then I start thinking about the corporate world, you know, the real world out there outside of sport. And I think, you know, they don't do that very well. They don't play in the sandbox very well, right? We as coaches, I think, let's just say the ones that have been around the block a while, the ones that have really worked with different levels of athletes, we have to respect the fact that, it's not about the performance on the mat, like you said. It's more about them as people. But when you look at the corporate world, it's like, where does the attention get paid? It's really paid towards those people that are high performers, the high drivers, or whatever it might be. And I just thought, for a moment, this is sort of sacred ground. This is special, that people can grow and be made to feel special because they are getting that great coaching from somebody like yourself to say, hey, we don't care where you're at on the rung, whether you're winning one match this year or you're winning 100 matches this year. This is a little bit different than the rest of the world. And I hadn't really thought about that until you guys just mentioned that here. And I think that is sort of important. And maybe it's a lesson for others to take, that what happens from coaches and athletes at this level is a little bit bigger picture. Like Mike, you were saying, just throw out a double leg or throw out a single leg. The reflectiveness of what you guys were saying is just pretty deep stuff. And I really like that.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, you're not going to be like, oh, or I mean, at the end of your life or your season or, your career, you're not going to be like, you know what, like you might feel really good about all the champions that you supported and developed. But like, if they go out into the world and they're bad people, you're like, well, maybe there's a missed opportunity there. So I feel like it's duality. It's really being able to create successful human beings on the mat. And then like in the big picture, like where are we putting our energies and what are we building? Because that reflects back to us in how our world is. Like I'm always amazed how impactful coaches are able to be in people's lives, especially youth as they're developing who they're going to be, what their personal values are, what they hold as successes and what they hold as, like not important. And I think coaches, when they can recognize how much of an impact they have on setting those standards for their team, then there's just so much that we can do with sport, because sport is like one of the most powerful tools of change that we have. It reaches so many different people. It teaches so many skill sets, but you got to kind of like be like, okay, I'm going to also take that on as my responsibility as a coach. And I feel pretty responsible for that. Yeah. Personally.
But that was you. You said it. It's me personally saying that I'm going to be responsible for the character development of these young people. That's very deliberate. It sounds very deliberate.
Yeah. It has to be, given that there's, I live in Alaska, and there's most Alaskans have dealt with some pretty tough stuff in life. We have the highest rate of gender-based violence, rape, like trafficking in the country and in some parts of the world. It's bad, right? So unless we're using every single tool that we have, coaching, teaching, if people are involved in faith, like it all has to be developing towards healing our communities and building skills and awareness. So then we move up and we make the world around us a little bit better. I think we lost Andrea.
Yeah, I think we lost Andrea momentarily. Hopefully she'll jump back on. I'll see her and I'll pull her back into the podcast. But so right now the pressure's on, Tela. You've got to carry the ball. So. But that's nothing unusual. We oftentimes have issues with people in different locations trying to dial in. But there's some really interesting things that in this original or the initial part of this podcast has come up. I'm curious a little bit about, if you could fill us in and some of our listeners and people watching the podcast about your experience, Tela. What sort of got you started? And, it's obviously been a hook for you through your career. You've stayed involved at the highest levels, but what was it that really attracted you to get into the sport? And then what was it that made you become a long hauler?
Okay, so so I grew up in Alaska, and I grew up like single mom in the woods. We weren't really like sporty. My mom's background is in theater. She was a classically trained mime. And so I got into middle school, and I was like, sports are cool. I'm gonna do those. And I like tried the sports. I was so bad at them. I was so bad at all the sports, no ball handling skills. Like I was athletic and like an eager beaver, but I was so bad. Like I just had no skills. And so wrestling came around, and I was like, okay, it was like volleyball or wrestling. I was like, that's all balls. I'm not gonna like, nothing is gonna work for me with that. And so I decided to try wrestling. I had tried Aikido a little bit. And so it made me interested, and tried to join the team. My principal was on board, the coach was on board, but the school board said, no, we had girls try before, and that didn't really work out. So I had to write, I had a teacher that, a PE teacher that told me about Title IX, and she's like, you might, cite Title IX and try to get them to allow you to wrestle. And so I wrote a letter to the school board with my 14-year-old self saying, please let me wrestle. I just really want to give it a try. I don't know why. I just want to. And I don't think you have a choice because there's this Title IX, and I think you have to allow equal opportunity for girls. And so they said, okay. And so I was able to join wrestling in middle school. I wasn't good at that either at that time, but I just really loved it. I mean, for me, why I love wrestling is it's because it's like, it's kind of like a game of chess with your brain and your body at the same time. And it's like a puzzle that you want to solve, and it's really intense. And you just use whatever you have, whatever your skill sets are, to be successful. Whether it's, you are strong, or you're fast, or you're, smart, or you just work hard, or you're stubborn, like you just get to use what you've got. And I think that that's kind of what stuck with me with wrestling. I just loved it. It's just like that puzzle that you got to solve. And stuck with it through high school into college. And then when they opened up the training center program in 2002, I was able to get on that first training center program, and was able to be around some really high quality coaches, other high quality athletes, in an environment that was able to focus me on wrestling. And then, was able to make it on the first team. And then I took a break from wrestling. I broke up with it. I was like, I pieced out. And then in 2015, 16, Sally was like, hey, I'm starting this nonprofit. We're going to call it Wrestle Like a Girl. And I need board members. And I was like, okay. And so, but, I had some things in wrestling that were frustrating. I left wrestling and had a really unhealthy relationship with food. And I didn't even I was like a pretty solid weight cutter. I was good at it. And I did it in one of the more healthy ways at that time. There's a couple other instances where I just felt like, you know what? It just negative things that happened to me within the sport of wrestling that I just was like, I don't know. I don't want to be a part of that. So when I came back into wrestling, this is much longer than you wanted. I'm sorry. I was like, yes, I want to come back, and I will join this board for Wrestle Like a Girl. But I'm only going to be a part of wrestling if I'm making it a better place. And the issues that I had were addressing those issues, because how can I bring a girl into the sport of wrestling if I'm like, welcome to the sport of wrestling, later you're going to have this eating disorder, and you're going to be around some people who are going to treat you really badly. Good luck with that. Welcome. It's super fun. And it is so good, but there's also some parts that there's no way that I can think about bringing my daughter into the sport unless we start addressing. And so that's what's kind of gotten me involved, and I can't help it. Now I'm like, ooh, let's talk about stuff. Let's address it, and let's why aren't we? I can't help it. It's a little intense now.
I love your perspective though, Tela, because I personally I didn't know your backstory, right? And so I guess my question would be, how can you at this point, if there were this balancing of negative stuff that went on and the positive elements of what wrestling brought to the table. And so you disappeared for a while and sort of maybe came back, reinvented yourself and your perspective. But why did that happen? And how can you, with some of the negativeness or the trauma that took place, how has that motivated you to have this, be this person today that's got this wonderful smile and excited about life and stuff? Because if there is that stuff in the background, that could have destroyed you, right? Or could it, for some girls, maybe it has.
Yeah. And I think that I had a lot of really, really good coaches and people around me. So I think I was shielded from a lot of the challenges that some early generation wrestlers experienced and wrestlers are experiencing now.
Yeah.
But some of the things that I did notice, but when I started wrestling, like, you were just like super lucky to be allowed to be on the team, right? Like, that was my first experience with wrestling. I was like, please let me do wrestling. And I think there's this law, but like, please let me do wrestling. I'll be really good. And so you get really good at being really good as a woman on in a male dominated space. You like don't make waves. You like you can never like be the one that is the first one to quit or the medium one to quit, anything but one of the last ones to quit or never quit, because not only are you showing that you're, like, you don't deserve to be there, but like all the other girls coming after me, like, I'm gonna drop, if I drop the ball for myself, I'm gonna drop the ball for everybody else. And that actually makes some really solid, good, hardcore wrestlers, which is great. And I think that that's where we have a lot of success with these, like in Alaska or in like other places that girls always wrestled boys. Like they grew up mentally with a lot of mental fortitude to focus on wrestling and figure out how to navigate difficult systems. And understanding difficulty is a lot, or working through difficulty is a lot of what makes success in wrestling.
Tela, I have to ask you that. To me, it's pretty amazing. Did you have that insight at the time, or is this more that you've thought about it now? Because in the moment, were you really truly thinking about being a tone setter for the rest of the girls that were coming up in the future? That seems incredibly mature at that point in your career.
Well, I mean, I think that, you don't understand, like you're like, okay, well, I gotta pull my own weight. I feel like you feel really important. Like, it's really important for you to pull your own weight. And in your mind, it might not be as mature. I think it's more like, excuse me, I'm going to use bad language. Like, I better not fuck it up for other people too. Right? Like, I just don't want to, because, you recognize that what you're carrying. And so you become a really, really good teammate. And there's a lot of value to that. I recognize later in my life when I'm like, oh, hey, like Sally would be like, because Sally's good at using her voice, and she's very verbal. And she'd be like, Tela, if you don't say something, then like, or if you don't stand up or do something or lead, they're going to ask some other Yahoo to lead who's less qualified. And I'm like, okay, but it doesn't come naturally to me. And really, like, I realized from that it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, from my perspective, from our early generation of wrestling, because we were like used to being really good followers, but not necessarily good, stand up and lead and say what is on your mind. Because when you're in a community of people that you don't want to get kicked out of, you don't make waves. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that is your experience, Andrea.
I've noticed a lot of head nodding, Andrea.
Well, the similarities between my experience and Tela's are numerous. As Tela pointed out, this is not just an experience of women who were wrestling in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. This has still been very much the individual experience of thousands of girls that have been involved in wrestling, whether at the high school level, the USA Wrestling level, youth level, whatever the case may be. And even in 2022, with all of the growth, all of the momentum. Everyone is so hyped up about girls and women's wrestling right now. We are still, as Joan Fulp says, changing a lot of hearts and minds. Where I deeply relate to what Tela is describing is my high school experience. I didn't have to at 15 look up Title IX laws at that point. My first high school experience with wrestling was in 1985. Around this time, we can all remember what was happening with Title IX in the collegiate environment, and we had seen wrestling programs and many other sports programs that were dropped in an effort to make sure that colleges were meeting Title IX requirements. So the wrestling community at the time that I wrestled in high school in 1985, 86, I was not welcome. I am the reason why we're losing men's collegiate wrestling. Where I think I had where I had a different experience was I had a high school coach in the spring have a meeting, for any interested wrestlers to come and learn about wrestling for, the following winter. And I went to that meeting and I waited for all of the boys and everyone to leave. And I approached him one-on-one and said, I'm going to turn out for the wrestling team. And he had these brochures in his hand for a summer wrestling camp. And he handed me a brochure and said, okay, we'll see you next winter. He did not flinch. I don't know if he just didn't know if I would really show up. I'm not even sure I was really sure I was going to show up. This was still, I'm 15 and every day I have a new favorite color,
How did that make you feel when he didn't flinch and he just said the opportunity is right here in your hand? How did that
I'm not sure that I had the I think I was bracing for impact. I was bracing for an adult male leader to tell me no. I was bracing for him to potentially say something mean or sexist or cruel, and none of those things happened. I did, I wrestled in high school from 1986 through 1989. And like Tela, man, I was so horrible at wrestling. And it's really hard to start wrestling as a high schooler. I don't care who you are, boy, girl, whatever. It's a hard time to start. So I have a soft spot for anyone who starts wrestling in high school. I was welcomed by the head coach. Some of the assistant coaches, I knew that they were not really excited about me being there. The other thing that I relate to with Tela is every day, a lot of my focus was not about how can I have the best practice. A lot of my focus and energy would go into how can I make sure they don't get rid of me? How can I make sure that I get to come another day? It's that same thing. I cannot make a mistake. I have to do everything perfectly. And if I don't do it perfectly, I am giving them a reason to not want me there. And perfectionism is not good stuff. And for me to direct all of my energy toward 50 people and each day, was that enough? Was I good enough? Not good enough in wrestling. Was I am I enough for you to stay here and be valued as a member of the team?
Okay, this is interesting. Both of you have shared the same in that area, that it was a lot more about just getting a chance to come back. It wasn't about focusing on any W's or L's or making the team. It was just you wanted to be from day to day good enough to stay in the room.
Yeah, you're surviving two things. Everyone is surviving wrestling practice, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what I have in common with my male peers. Man, we're all getting through this tough practice. Coach just had us do double legs for 2 minutes straight with no break, whatever the case. We're all experiencing that, right? And we're all figuring out how to have courage in those moments and not give up on ourselves. So we're all the same. Where I was different from my peers was a lot of my energy was spent on, was I enough today to get to come back tomorrow? Am I enough for that kid to finally start wanting to be my wrestling partner? How much more do I have to prove to this boy that I'm really here seriously? And that I want to learn, and I want to learn now. I had assistant coaches that they wouldn't come. They wouldn't give me any instruction. So I figured that out. I'm like, you know what? I want to learn. I want to learn now. I can't wait for that coach to get comfortable. So I started taking the initiative. I would just go up to them and I would make them deal with me because I want to learn now. I'm the person in here with 50 adolescent boys and 3 or 4 adult men. If anyone should be feeling uncomfortable and thinking they want to hide in the corner, it should be me. Mm-hmm. But I realized the best way for me to survive these 2 things is I have to do more. I have to do extra. And we all want to do the extra in wrestling if we want to be successful. But it's really a mental switch between, am I doing this for me or am I doing this to prove and please to others so that I'm okay here? And that's a lot of mental energy not directed in the right places. You know, we want athletes, whether they're beginner, you know, intermediate, whatever, we want to make sure that everything that they're doing is directed inward in terms of performance, you know, mental, either the mental side of wrestling, the sports psychology. We want to make sure all that's directed inward. If we are doling out, you know, am I okay here? It's just really burdensome. And that carried on when I trained at Boise State University when they still had a wrestling program. Oh my gosh! Now I'm in a room with you know, at that time as a Division I program. I'm not there to take a spot. I just need a place to train. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even and you know, women. All of my wrestling at that point was freestyle. Never asked them to wrestle freestyle. They said, "Hey, I just need a place to train. I'm not here to be your 118 pounder, right?" And every day in the locker room, I would have to give myself a pep talk about, you know, the same thing Tela's saying, keep my mouth shut, do the extra, keep proving to them you're serious about being here. It's just exhausting.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then you start accepting like this is the standard. And so then you expect that. And so like now I'll go into a wrestling room and people will be like, oh, Tela, hey, come teach this, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wait, you want me here? Like it's always like, you know, like, so you get this mindset that is used to being a second class citizen. And so, and then a lot of times another thing that happens is that you're like, okay, this is so important. I'm working so hard at this. And then women in this space start protecting the space from other women who might screw it up for them, you know? And so that can get a little bit, you know, just it misfires a little bit. And so the reason why I talk about this sort of stuff is because our stories are so similar, even though Andrea's like the OG, like she is the pioneers of the pioneers.
The GOAT.
Like I'm kind of a pioneer, but she's like
I
OG.
disagree because every year we have a new batch of female pioneers.
It's true. It's like there's like all these different levels of pioneers, but the stories are really similar. And for a long time, I'm like, I actually don't want to complain because like that's what you're not supposed to do, because it doesn't it doesn't make you friends. And I get it. Like it's, you know, not great to complain and make friends, but the camaraderie and the recognition of those challenges is so important between different women or different groups that I think it can keep women staying in the sport of wrestling. It can heal from some like challenges that they have. It can help them recognize that their voice is so important, even though they're not used to using it. They're used to keeping it quiet and kind of muffling it a little bit. So I think that this conversation, thank you guys, is so important because it really helps with that, just that understanding similar experiences and growing from them and recognizing that like I deal with a lot of confidence issues in life, and and in coaching. And I'm like, if I, who am an Olympian and like go into a high school wrestling room and I feel like a little bit not very confident in teaching like a high C for some reason, because maybe like a different coach is doing it different, then like the mom who has been around wrestling her whole life and then has decided to come and start coaching, or the high school wrestler who comes in, you know, other female coaches, they're probably dealing with the same thing, but they're also, they can't be like, oh yeah, you're an Olympian, you got this. So like, I think it's so important to do that so we can bring more women keep more women in the sport of wrestling, not just bring them in, but like give them good experiences and then keep them in, because like we've seen with wrestling, we're so much like wrestling is so much better when we have both men and women supporting each other and working together. It's what saved wrestling, right? In 2013, when it was going to get cut by the Olympics, it's what's like keeping college programs. So I have a lot of reservations about having these conversations, because part of me is like, just keep your mouth quiet, be nice, and like be a good teammate. But really, like, I'm like, okay, just like be an adult and like be a leader and do what you need to do, because this conversation has to be had. So
isn't that being a good teammate too, though? Right. I can't be a good teammate if I see you slacking on our values and our team, you know, and all of a sudden I just let you do it. I can't do that. And it sounds like we need more people standing up for what those common values are for wrestling, and not necessarily putting blinders on that say it doesn't matter if it's boys or girls or black or white, it doesn't matter. But we can't put the blinders on, but we have to make sure that we really believe what inclusivity means. And that means that we bring everyone in. And if we don't feel comfortable, like you said, well, get over it, figure it out. You know, I don't feel very comfortable before I go out and shake hands, to be honest, because I know somebody's going to put their sweaty arms all over me and it's kind of gross. But you get comfortable with that grossness real quick. And I'm not doing a great job of marketing our sport right now.
I think it was the grossness that attracted me, actually.
I was like, yeah, I love that. Like, just like grinding, like we're getting
wrestling. There's an honoriness. There's this thing, this
primal,
the honoriness, the selfishness, the unapologeticness of wrestling is so attractive to me. And I think in part because I was a girl, all of the messages that I had received throughout my childhood from all the different directions was smile, be quiet, don't make waves, and be nice. But yet I have this thing that exists in me, and we all have it, where I'm like, but I'm not always nice. And I like being honoring. And I like things to be hard and difficult and painful almost. And where do I find a place as a female to express that fully with full acceptance from the community? I kind of got it from cross country, and I kind of got it from track and field, and I kind of got it from gymnastics, but I found I could really just express that part of me in wrestling. And it's wonderful. So I think what we have to do now, so I found that as an athlete, right? Now we want to take the female athletes, and we're gonna tie right into what Tela is saying. We don't want girls and the value for them right now to just be as athletes. We have to start seeing women and other groups of people as having high potential right now in our sport for leadership, for officiating, for coaching, for being maybe, the next director of USA Wrestling that, someday. So what we have to do at the coaching level is we have to start looking at some of these young boys and girls, and we have to start cultivating coaching leadership in them, officiating leadership in them, tournament development leadership in them, right? We have to start planting the seed of, hey, you'd be a great coach, but let's start working on those tools now, right? Because we have all been in wrestling rooms where there are just these handful of kids that naturally They possess those skills kind of natural, and they get further developed in the wrestling room. And sometimes I say to myself, let's just let that kid run practice today. And then when the practice is over, we have a little meeting. What did you see? What did you find challenging? Where do you think you could improve if you were coaching this program tomorrow, right? It's just these little things. The generation of girls coming through right now, we need to have conversations with them about being coaches and officials. And the coaches and officials community is the next layer where they need to start putting out the welcome mat for women, right? So we've had the resistance at the athlete level, right? And at the school and collegiate level. And we're working through that very successfully right now. The next layer is women in coaching. We've got to help the existing coaching community realize every girl that's wrestling right now is walking potential. She's your next legendary high school coach. She's your next pioneer legendary collegiate coach, right? Maybe even for some of your boys programs, right?
Absolutely. We've got a girl, Jessica Fresh in Texas. She's the coach of the year, and she runs the boys program. And it's
so we've got to stop seeing at the collegiate. So we've made all this advancement at the athlete level. We've got to take that, and at our coaching and officiating level, we have to say to ourselves, we have all these women and young girls coming up. It's walking potential. And how can we open the doors and create a welcome mat for them like we have been doing for them as athletes, and not repeat mistakes that we made with girls and women's in the athlete space? How can we not repeat that in the collegiate leadership, coaching, officiating space, right?
Yeah.
And we can do that because wrestling is made of good people.
It is. Yeah.
Mike, we need to pin this in the show notes. That at about the 34-minute mark, some just amazing thoughts. And if somebody only listened to just those 3 or 4 minutes of what Andrea was saying, especially and in regards to with women's advancements and moving them forward in the areas of coaching and officiating, administrative roles, et cetera. I think it's absolutely fantastic. When Mike talked to me about this podcast, I sort of framed this in my own mind about just thinking about how this plays out with you two special guests, that it probably would serve us well to talk about some of the history, certainly in regards to, what's happened in the past back into the 80s and now where we are moving forward. But it sort of fit into 3 categories in my simple mind in regards to the past, sort of like the present. And so now that's sort of like what we're discussing, and then maybe even sort of finish up with, what's it look like to you guys in the future? So we sort of have a historical perspective, what's happening now, and where we headed down the road with women in the sport. I think that's a great segue, sort of like where we're at right now. Where else do you see the good, the bad that's happening now? And maybe even let's start looking into the future prognostically about where do you see us landing in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah. Big question. I love, Andrea, I'm really excited about what you were just saying as well. It's just like so spot on. I think that, as we start, like right now, college programs are adding programs like left and right. I'm like, oh, another college women's wrestling program. Oh, another one. Wow. It's so exciting. But with this expansive growth that we have right now, comes, the fact that we don't have the same pool of female college coaches, which we're going to start developing. But also, there's clubs and stuff starting at colleges and programs that are run by people that maybe don't really recognize how important it is to address certain issues when it comes to women, right? If you go in and coach a college program directly the same as you would coach your men's college program, the women's college program is the men's college program, you might miss a couple of things that will help with performance, retention, and just general well-being of your athletes. I think that starting to pool the knowledge between lots of different coaches across the country about what is successful and how to coach girls specifically. Andrea helped with coaching girl wrestlers best practices, and we were able to put that out pretty widely. But also, like, I think whenever you're in this growth stage, it has to be done responsibly. And I think that there's a lot of room for error right now as we're growing really intensely. And the more support that can be given, the more communication that's about, the better our communication, and the more safeguards that we have, the more safeguards and training, the better it will be in the long run. I think that what we must be aware of is that with this big growth, we need to make sure that we have the coaching, including female coaches, and then those athletes being supported and being able to be successful when they get into college, for instance, so we can keep those programs around. Otherwise, I think that women's wrestling will kind of like hit a plateau or be challenged there.
Tela, I think that's an excellent point. And as much so, Mike and I had a conversation prior to this podcast a couple of days ago, and that's something that I brought up. And I've seen this magnificent growth of the sport, but what you hope that you don't do is outgrow the infrastructure of what is supporting it. And I guess, so that leads me to ask you guys, what is the infrastructure that is absolutely necessary to make sure that we don't have this expansive growth and then all of a sudden the legs start to fall out from underneath us? That would be the last thing that anyone associated with USA Wrestling. I'm helping with a women's program here in the Kansas City area. That's the last thing we'd want to see, right? We want to make sure that moving forward, that the growth is there, but the infrastructure is sort of being built at the same time, because let's face it, the men took a long time. The men took a long time to get where they're at. The women now coming in, it's going to be big, irregardless of whether somebody wants it in their high school or they want it in the college programs. It's there and it's going to be here. And so how do we make sure that it's being supported with the structure that's necessary to sustain the growth?
Yeah. So like from my perspective as a coach who sends girls off, like for instance, to college programs across the country, and we're up here in Alaska and it's really hard to visit those programs, there's been a lot of times that we've sent girls off and it hasn't been successful. Maybe it wasn't the right fit for that girl. I think that people are so hungry for athletes right now that sometimes you're making things work that really shouldn't work. You're pairing the wrong athlete with the wrong program and nobody wins. That is the better case scenario. I've also sent athletes to programs where, it was a predatory situation, and that's happening. Like, there's so much good happening, but there's also these little pockets of really, really shady situations happening. And I think we need to figure out a way to shut that down and address those situations without harming the girls who have chosen to go to those college programs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I think. That's from my perspective as a high school coach, sending girls off into college with that big growth right now. And then, and I think some of the answers to that is just conversations like this, and then just investing into female coaches, right? Supporting them, mentorship, training, education, funding. We just have to get past a threshold, and then I think we're going to be pretty solid. But right now we're at that point where some intentional focus and development will make a long-term success.
Michael, we had the Silver College here in Kansas City just recently, and I can't remember the total numbers, but it was a significant number of coaches that were there, and a significant number of women coaches that were there. I don't mean to put the cart before the horse, but maybe there are opportunities to scholarship more women into the into the silver colleges and stuff. But certainly it was so exciting to see the number of women that were there, and the questions that came up, and some of the things when we got into the area of nutrition was just really interesting with some of the questions that they brought to the table for that. So man, I that's fantastic stuff. And so Andrea, in your perspective, I mean, you've had a chance over the years to see, looking into your crystal ball, what's ahead for us with women in wrestling and wrestling in general, for that matter.
Yeah, I think what's ahead for us is, and and maybe this is more a hope than I can really forecast, but I think that we are going to normalize wrestling as a more popular sport. We are going to, I hope, have athletic director, athletic department tables. We are taking up more territory, meaning we are bringing more athletes, more coaches, more into those meetings than we ever have before, with the goal of maintaining our stability and maintaining our place in high school sports, maintaining our place in the collegiate space. I'm really talking about our long-term stability and longevity in athletic departments, whether it's high school or whether it's college. So I'm really excited about that potential. As you guys are talking about infrastructure, I think one thing we have an opportunity to do right now is we don't have to build infrastructure around girls wrestling after the male model that has been in existence and evolving for 50 some odd plus years, right? Mm-hmm. We have an opportunity to say, okay, we've seen this model. Let's make sure we're creating a model that is for girls and women. Because one of the mistakes that we make is we try to make everything identical, equal, look exactly like what's already here. And the only reason that model exists is because boys got the invite to wrestling just before we got the invite. Like my invite got lost in the mail, right?
Fair enough.
Okay. So I think we have an opportunity not to have to do things the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. We should embrace that. We shouldn't be afraid of that. This is a great evolutionary time for the sport of wrestling. We need to seize that, rather than do what we have naturally done for so many years, which is to dig in and say, but this is the way we've always done it. Again, we've got to step out of that fear. We have to realize there's nothing bad on the horizon for us so long as we're evolving and changing. But yeah, go ahead.
Is it knowing when to use, right? Tela, you said great quality, being stubborn, right? And you're absolutely right. But isn't there a time when you have to say, this isn't the time for me to be stubborn, right? If I'm a boys coach and they're going to bring women's wrestling into this isn't the time for me to be stubborn. This is the time for me to say, I'm going to welcome into the room. This is here. I'm going to put my happy face on, fake it till I make it if I have to. But we have an infrastructure. We have coaches all around the country that can accept girls into a safe environment right now if they're deliberate, right?
Yeah, I think that we've gone past this tipping point where we're when Andrea and I wrestled, we're like, I don't know, maybe it's gonna fizzle out, this girl wrestling thing, right? And
every year, Tela, I was like, I said yes to every opportunity, whether I could personally afford to pay for it or not. I mean, because I never had student loan debt. I had wrestling debt because I was so concerned. This could get cut off at any moment. So if Trish Saunders calls and says, hey, could you go to Midlands and do yes, I'm there. Like, I have no money in the bank account. I'm going to figure it out. Because every opportunity I felt like, man, I don't know where this is going to go. We may not happen. Yeah. Can
I read a quote from Trish?
Oh, yeah.
This was in December 2021 Win Magazine. And she was talking about, there's a great article, great picture, Andrea, in there too. Women's wrestling reluctant pioneers.
Oh, yeah.
And she had said that it was at a time when the anthem was, "We will not encourage the development of women's wrestling in any way."
Oh,
This is
yeah.
what our women had to deal with, right? We are not encouraging it. And what she said, and I think this is important, what she said most of us heard, right? Perspective, maybe this wasn't the intent, but what most of the women heard was, "Why are you here? What is your social purpose?"
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that has been my experience even recently when I have come into certain environments, whether I've been asked to come in, whether I was asked to perform a role, or whether, whatever the case, I have walked in and there is a shift in the room of, why is she here? What does she want? Is she going to cause trouble?
Mhm.
It's crazy.
Oh no.
And
But
if we don't know that this is a problem, I can't remember. You guys both give me so much great advice that I can't remember which. If we don't know there's a problem, then we don't know that we need to take action. And so, if anybody's listening to the podcast right now, there has been a problem, there is a problem, and we don't want to see a problem. Is that pretty fair?
Yes, I feel like yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, there's problems that happened that are continuing right now because I think that a lot of times people don't recognize what that looks like in wrestling. For me, that looks like, certain situations that I got into within wrestling that were really inappropriate or, really hurtful or harmful, that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm going to just avoid that situation because it's not going to, it's going to hinder my like ability to stay within the sport. And so I think that right now things are shifting, like with the like Larry Nassar and Safe Sport and gymnasts speaking up for themselves, that girls now have a different message. They're like, okay, if we say something, we're going to be listened to, and that's our right. So like it's already shifting, which is really cool. And I think within the sport of wrestling, it's like our job to articulate the challenges, the areas that are that we need to change, so people know what to change, because it's not going to change unless we articulate that, I suppose. And then,
I would like to frame this one from like what I feel like would come from our coaches council. And the question would be, how do we better identify problems and make sure that the problems are dealt with? So how if I'm thinking collectively as our group, and if we could service that need in some way, shape, or form as a coaches council, working with USA Wrestling directly, how do we better identify problematic areas and situations, and then move forward? Because I guess if we don't know, we don't know. So can somebody help me with that one?
Well, for me, like the things that I have seen in my wrestling communities throughout my life is that sometimes coaches will have relationships with their athletes. I mean, and that's so inappropriate. And now we have guidelines around that, which is much better. But when that happens, or when those lines are crossed, I think that the coaches network really needs to talk about it and make it part of their culture that shows that that's not acceptable. Like that's so inappropriate and not okay. Because a lot of times what happens is we just don't, you're like, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to think about that. It's like so horrible that it just gets pushed off. And then like the situation happens again and you're like, oh, yuck, like let's not do that again. But if you don't talk about it and there's not a culture like, hey, like I've noticed that this situation happened. Let's not, like, this is wrong. Like you just have to say that it's wrong. And then people will start like changing that culture where it's, instead of like, I'm going to ignore it. Like, oh, that's wrong. Like, this is not okay. Like, does everybody know this? Everybody. Okay. Like, this is, clarifying what those roles look like. and not allowing that to happen, no matter how good the coach is and how capable he is of getting championships or helping girls.
Does that really happen? Do people get away with stuff because they're winning?
I mean,
doesn't happen. Come on.
I would say I can think of instances at every single level.
Pull your tongue out of the middle of your cheek.
I was wondering if my sarcasm was clear.
Women have been succeeding in sport in spite of or despite the poor, negative, destructive, or abusive behavior of their coaches in all sports. There's a situation going on with women's soccer right now. We're all very aware of what happened with Larry Nassar at USAG. So women have been succeeding in sport in spite of or despite not prioritizing safety of women. The safety of everyone has all these marks that are similar. But I think when we're talking about infrastructure and we talk about what can we do, we have to start talking more explicitly about issues specific to women. I think we have a tremendous opportunity right now within our state associations to prioritize education of issues with women, girls and young women, that we can start helping them to see, we can provide education, we can provide information, we can provide tasks for coaches that they need to complete. One of those tasks can be something, we can provide things for state associations to start using on the regular and to start encouraging their clubs, right? And it's going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. It's supposed to be. Wrestling's uncomfortable, right? We're the sport that says, well, we live in uncomfortable. That's what we do. But if we're only living in uncomfortable in the physical, right? So-and-so can do 500 push-ups. This girl can do 30 pull-ups with chains on. I mean, that's awesome, right? We love all that. That makes us go, right? But we have such a responsibility right now to create safe environments for boys and girls. But I think we have a lot of people whose ideas of safety are too different. We have to be common and unified in what we think safety is. And we have to be able to support coaches managing themselves, as Tela says. We have to empower coaches to be able to call each other out. And we have to be able to encourage, we have to also educate athletes, boys and girls, to know these things are not okay. They may not be having these conversations at home. Or mom and dad think this coach is amazing and wonderful, but the child is silently suffering because there are things happening that get overshadowed by the glory and the wins and the success and the All-American, right? And we have a kid who can't use their voice. They're going to stay in this situation because they have not been empowered to have a voice. And so I think there's a lot of things we can do at the state chapters. I think we have a really great opportunity right now to change what safe means and for everyone to get on board with that.
I know we're getting a little bit late in the podcast, and not to cut us off, but I had one more question that it appears to me that Tela, you brought it up, inappropriate relationships with coaches and their athletes, et cetera. If that being maybe the number one observable behavior that is like on the radar that is just not okay, what would be number two, number three that would also be a part of this directory that is just as coaches that we can self-monitor, our coaches council could always be on the alert for? I think that, to me, though, it's probably a lot more of an issue than we recognize. There's probably other problems as well, because if that's happening, then there's other issues, I'm sure, in the same environments. But what would be the number twos, the number threes that we might also, as male coaches that have been in this for the longest of time, should also be on the lookout?
Wait, am I going? Okay. Well, yeah.
Oh.
You guys are looking.
Yeah. So the one that I talked about earlier is a little bit hot button for me right now because I just sent a wrestler off to college last year, and she had this experience, and I'm so frustrated. Like, I'm like, God damn it. Sorry. That's a bad word. But it's so frustrating to me because like I'm like, oh, like I helped her, like, I don't know. I helped her get to that point, and that's a bad situation. And I feel so frustrated about it. So that is obviously, I'm a little bit hot on that right now. But I think the other things that, like the number two, I don't know, Andrea is so good at like breaking things down and seeing big pictures. But a lot of times I think that people are trying to peak their wrestlers, not even just their girl wrestlers, but their wrestlers way too young, and they get burned out before, especially with girls. Like, I'll see these like 5th graders, 6th graders, like at all these different camps and then by the time they get into middle school, they're done. Like, they're just already burnt out. I think people get super excited about all the opportunity that's out there. They're like, and then my girl is going to take advantage of that opportunity, whether it's a parent or a coach or the community. Like, everybody wants their kids to be like to make it to the top because it feels so almost accessible right now because there's so much opportunity. And like in many ways it is, but I think that a lot of times you just got to let kids be kids and let the process happen and build the joy and the foundations for healthy wrestling in the future and healthy like sports psychology and just psychology in general and healthy body and nutrition, like building those when the athletes are young. Like, otherwise you having these girls peak in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, maybe like sophomore year of high school, and it's such a waste. And then then they get burnt out on wrestling, or their body breaks down on them but before they get into the area when they really could be competitive at those upper levels.
So you're saying there's no college scholarship opportunities for 4th graders?
No.
Those scholarships don't exist yet, right?
They don't even start looking at 4th graders. In case anybody was thinking they would. They're not.
I would say sports specialization, we're still, even with girls, I'm starting to see it, a lot right now, where, if you don't go to Fargo and you don't go to UWW and you don't go to this camp, you're gonna get behind. You gotta, we're all working really hard to preserve childhood right now. We're all working hard to help kids understand balance. I personally, I love a multi-sport athlete. Coaching multi-sport athletes is, and not that I don't enjoy, working with or supporting or counseling someone who's decided this is my sport. But I think we have to make sure that we're still making wrestling, where's the priority list here, and then I would tag on specifically with girls right now, weight cutting, weight cutting for developing young women, both physically, mentally. We have to understand that as much as we may think that we can avoid those dangers, we won't. We are going to make a lot of missteps there. We have a responsibility to these girls and women to protect them from poor nutritional practices, from, poor advice, we don't really need, I want girls in the weight room, and I want them working on skills. I want girls in the weight room, and I want them working on skills. I want to keep the focus there. Great conditioning. We're getting in the weight room, and we're hammering out our skills, right? Mm-hmm. And if we're doing those things, and we're doing those well in our coaching communities, then we're going to have girls that are going to compete really well close to their natural weights. Mm-hmm. And we are going to support them in having healthy relationships to food, as Tela says. And we know this isn't just a girl's issue. The food issues and body dysmorphic disorder, these are universal issues that affect boys and girls, but we know they disproportionately affect girls. So we have to know that. And if we know that and we're armed with that knowledge, now we can take care of those girls properly.
We can be deliberate about how we care for them.
Being deliberate, right? And I think, you know, if I'm a new coach to coaching growth, I may not know all this stuff, right? So we in the USA Wrestling community, or the Wrestle Like a Girl community, we're going to keep working hard to find you coaches, right? We're going to keep working really hard to find you and make sure we're giving you good information. But what you do with it after that, we can't control. You know, we're counting on you to put the physical and mental welfare of athletes above everything else. And it's hard because sports have gotten a little nutty right now, right? And social media glorifies achievement in sport and blows it up in a way that's not very realistic. We know, we've got all the pictures of the medals, but man, 2 weeks ago, you should have seen that kid crying in the corner, right?
Exactly.
The social media, post of that.
Andrea, you nailed it. When we were talking about this, you said that this isn't the conversation. This is the start of the conversation. This is not something that, hey, we're going to launch a podcast and here's the day that it shows up.
It's not a one-off. Yeah.
This is something we're going to keep talking about. And whether it's talking about the mindset, whether it's talking about tools for coaches, whatever that's going to be, we're going to keep talking about this, and we're going to keep getting resources out because we've got great organizations like Wrestle Like a Girl and USA Wrestling. And I think what makes them great organizations is the people, right? And so if 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if we were running into those kind of issues, I'm sorry, the National Wrestling Hall of Fame too, they're awesome. And Gable Museum, I caught that. It was subtle, but I caught it.
I'm representing today.
And they're awesome. Anyway, that's it. I'm done.
Well,
no, yeah. I mean, Andrea's she's kind of like the Mr. Miyoto, Mr.
Miyagi?
Sensei
Miyagi.
That's who it is.
There you go.
Yes.
I don't have to do all the yard work. I'm good. That's good.
People come over to your house and get some yard work done.
Yeah.
Be like,
But you know what though, Tela? Everything that I'm saying, this is what's been given to me by the wrestling community through people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wrestling, we know it's a sport, we've got athletes, but look, this is how we get to know one another, right? This is our community.
Yeah. And it is
the wrestling and the competition is but such a short thing. The rest of the time we're having dinner, we're on buses, we're in the car, we're having a party at so-and-so's house. That's really a lot of where the good stuff is. And I have had many, many opportunities to listen to people. So my words are really, I hope, just kind of a speaker for all the people that have shared, with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Our wrestling community really is special. Some of the that's what I take from wrestling, from my time wrestling. I'm like, wow, I have these people that I know and they're so cool and they're so different than me and they and they're similar to me. I don't know. The wrestling community is the best. The other day I was 6 hours away in remote Alaska and my car had this big issue and this one girl on a team called her dad who talked to this other guy and was like, go to this shop, and this other wrestler family was like, hey, if your car doesn't get done on this Sunday before you need to go back, you can use our Subaru. And everybody was just so willing to be, to step up as part of the community and help out another wrestler, help out another person, and go out of their way to be really their best selves and make a really big difference in my life. And that doesn't happen everywhere, wrestlers are ride or die. And that's you don't get that everywhere. Especially now when people feel so disconnected from each other. Our community is, it's the best.
You guys have absolutely been the best. As reference to this podcast, we have never gone anywhere near the length that we have gone on this particular podcast, but it's been entertaining. It's been educational. It's been everything that we had hoped that it might be. And I definitely think that, our listeners, our coaches out there in particular, will really gain some insights listening to you, and both female and male, coaches. There's a lot to take from this. We so much appreciate you guys jumping on with us today. Mike, you're going to have a tough time with this one because as far as editing goes, because I don't think you can cut much out of this one.
No.
There's just too much good stuff going on. I'll bounce it back to you real quick, Mike. Is there anything referenced with our coaches education program that you need to highlight right now before we call it a day, or where are we at?
You bet. Yeah, as you saw during the broadcast, we've got the Greg Strobel Leadership Academy fundraiser going on. It's our second annual. Both of our guests talked so much about the importance of our athletes learning how to be leaders, because our sport needs that, right? We need the administrators, we need the coaches, we need the officials. So we need to build that the best we can. So some great opportunities there. I'm going to put a ton of links in these descriptions. Andrea, you're one courageous girl, and the notes and things like that, the Wrestle Like a Girl best plans, the Women's Pioneers article, go to the description. There's a lot of good stuff for you there. Take your copper, your bronze, your silver, start your silver and your gold work. We need more women taking our certification programs. This is crazy. We sent this out to all the WCWA women's programs that we were going to give a free bronze to any athlete. I think it was free, or it might have been $10, and then they would just collect. But we were going to just basically make it. And I think out of the entire organization, we had 6 athletes that decided to take the course. And sometimes I think we fail to express the priority of education, whether that's to our athletes, to our assistants, or even recognize it ourselves. So we want to make sure that these things are available. So if you have an organization, you have a lot of women, and they want the educational opportunity, call us and let's see if we can work a deal with you. Let's make this affordable for you. All right. We want more coaches. And if we're going to do that, we got to back it up. So come to the US Open at the end of April. The Greg Strobel Leadership Academy will be presenting our first ever Athlete Advisory Council Leadership Award. And so we're really excited that on the big stand, leadership is going to be one of those things that USA Wrestling is recognizing, encouraging, and continuing to support. So again, to our guests, you guys are awesome. Thank you. Andrea, we'll do another 3.5-hour phone call soon, I'm sure.
Just give Joan Fulp and I on here.
We're going to put the link to that because we interviewed you and Joan for the Mat Talk. So we're going to put that link on here too. So thank you guys. And in 2019, at the end of 2019, we had 20 states sanctioned women's wrestling. Here we are 2 years later, and we're at 34.
Yeah.
Where's the gap? Where are these other states? What's going on?
I think that we will. I hate talking about it because I feel like I have the power to jinx things, which is not true. But I think that we're going to see hopefully some more announcements this year. And here's what I would say with confidence. Every state is now fully engaged in moving towards an official girls championship. And that is exactly where we want to be. And I look forward to every single announcement and cheering them on and supporting them. Our whole USA Wrestling community is here to support our friends over in the high school space.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I guess we'll pull the plug on this one. So it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you guys so much, Andrea, Tela, for jumping on. Mike, it's always good to visit with you. I'm sure we'll be on the phone within the next 24 hours anyway. So enjoy the day. I'll be down in Texas here in a few days. It'll probably be after this airs, but to watch the USA event that's down there. I know there's been a lot of changes and modifications in that, but certainly looking forward to see Oklahoma State and Iowa. By this time it's broadcast, it'll be history, but nonetheless, that's coming up on the horizon. And like you said, at the end of April, the Open and stuff. So again, thanks, Tela. Thanks, Andrea. Mike, great to see you again. And until next time, enjoyed the opportunity to send out another Signal on Heads Up podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having us. Thanks, Mike and Andrea.
Thanks, Tela.
Thank you, guys.
You're awesome. Yeah.